Okay, so I want to talk to you a little bit about the cylinder heads. This is our head. These are the heads for the 427. Now, what we've done is we've taken the stock valves out of these heads, and we've machined the heads, the seat, and the bowl, and so forth for a larger head, or a larger valve rather. This is a 2-inch 190 and a 1-inch 880 valve, which is much larger than the stock valve. Very similar to what you'd find in the square port heads. I did consider putting aluminum heads, aftermarket aluminum heads on the 427, but most of the heads I looked at, they have really big intake runners, and they actually flow better on like a 454, a 468, a 502. The 427, which is a smaller cubic inch, shorter stroke engine, the aftermarket heads really don't work that well on the low end for the smaller cubic inch engine. Normally, I don't really, when it comes to small block Chevys, I really don't like the factory heads at all, with the exception of maybe the Vortex. But the 781 casting head is an open chamber, large oval port head that was made all throughout the 70s, and it is actually one of the best flowing oval port heads that GM ever made. They work really well. Now, I want to make sure you understand, putting larger valves in is quite a bit of work in one of these heads. There's not only is there's seat and bulwark area, but there's a whole host of modifications that have to go along with this. The cross-sectional area under the valve, this area here in here, is really critical. You have to open that up. I don't really want to get into a big cylinder head porting video here. I want this series, I want to focus on actually putting this in the S10, but just so you know, the 049s and the 781s are really, really good heads. They will support about 600 horsepower if they got the right short block under them. So they do work very well, they flow good, but they also needed extensive work to make that happen. So we put the larger stainless valves in. There is a guy on the internet, his name is Mark, and he either works or owns a company called Vortec Pro. His YouTube channel is Performance Engine Building 201. That's literally the name of his YouTube channel, Performance Engine Building 201. If you really want to get into an in-depth porting tutorial, Mark is one of the few guys on YouTube that I've watched his stuff and gone to myself, man, this guy is doing porting exactly the way that I would do it, the way I've been doing it for years. I mean, he actually, the information that he gives out is really good. I've been porting heads for almost 30 years, and he's, like I said, one of the few I've found that is actually doing it right. He's not the only one, but a lot of the videos you see on YouTube, it's just some guy assembling a motor, and he's got a bunch of music playing in the background, and then they show the engine revving up on the run stand or in the car, and I mean, that doesn't do you any good. Those videos are a complete waste of time. So, but Mark, on the YouTube channel Performance Engine Building 201, actually does a really thorough, very correct job of porting 781s. And so if you really want to get in depth with this, because like I said, if you're going to go with bigger valves, if you really want to make these flow, you got to put the bigger valves in. And if you're going to do that, there's a bunch of mods that have to be done. We have to go in and unshroud the valves. This area here is too tight, and so we have to go in and open this up. We have to do a whole bunch. We did a ton of porting to these heads. The short turn radius in here, the width of that, and the shape of that is absolutely critical. It has to be exactly right to promote good flow, and so you can't just go in and start hogging material out of here. You got to actually know what you're doing, because if you take a little bit of material out in the wrong spot, or you change the shape of that port, you could actually ruin the head, and it'll flow worse than it did when you started. So I would caution you not to just grab a Dremel and start hogging these heads out, because that's usually going to end up really bad for you. All right, so another thing is we got the dual spring setup that's going to go with our cam, the hardened retainers. We are putting a Howard's Big Daddy Rattler cam in this, because the lift and duration and so forth goes really good with the flow numbers that we got out of our heads here. So yeah, I mean, basically we got our new hardened push rods that are going to go with that. We got our hardened keepers, we got our seals, and of course the new stainless valves. One other thing I would advise you on here is the fact that the 781s and the 049s, they have a big giant rotator that goes underneath the exhaust valve. So this is basically what the rotator looks like. It's a two-piece deal, and it rotates, and it goes in here. Whoops! It goes in here, and it's designed to cause the exhaust valve to rotate, just so that it won't overheat or whatever. But here's the dealio: these things, when you go to a performance spring, any kind of a performance spring, these things are worthless. They will collapse and cause all kinds of issues. So what you have to do is you have to buy a set of these. This is what they call a rotator eliminator. CompCam sells them, and it's just a solid piece of chromoly steel, and it goes right underneath the spring like that, and it eliminates the rotator and takes the place of it. The intakes, of course, just take a small shim under it. Their design, they didn't have a rotator or anything on them. Now, some of the later heads had rotators on intake and exhaust, so you're going to have to buy a bunch of these if you're going to do the later model heads. So, but that's basically it. I'm going to go ahead and put these together. I'm going to get them together. Like I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, because I want this video to really be about installing the 427 and the S10. But I kind of wanted to talk to you about the heads that we used. And then I am going to get into some of the 427 build. I'll probably do 1 or 2 videos on assembling the 427, just so you guys can kind of get an idea of what's going into that engine. And yeah, so I'll get these together, and then we'll move on to the short block. One of the things I wanted to point out here, you guys, is if you look at the cylinders, you can see the relieving we did here. And I mentioned this earlier, but the cylinder on the big block Chevy shrouds the valves terribly. So one of the things that is really a good idea to do is to scribe a gasket line and then come in here and relieve this and open it up so that you get better flow. Now what I've done is I've taken one of our finished heads and put it on here, and if you look down in the bore here, you can see where the cylinder actually shrouds the valves. If you look right over here on this side of the cylinder down here, normally the cylinder would be shrouding that valve, but that's the area there that we've relieved. We've gone in and relieved this area here, and it makes a huge difference in the way that the engine runs. And it also, on this side, we've gone in and unshrouded the area right here on this valve. Otherwise the cylinder shrouds the head terribly. So you can see that opening that up, notching the engine block, definitely makes a difference in the flow. And it's one of the tricks that we do to these big blocks to really make a difference. We've seen as much as a 25 horsepower gain by notching the cylinders here and getting that, relieving that back so that that cylinder is not shrouding that canted valve. So I just thought I'd point that out. It's a good idea to go ahead and do that if you want to get a little bit extra power out of the thing.